No, don't do that. We don't even have time for that. Stop it. Oh boy. Okay. Everyone, we've got a long video ahead of us. I want you to sit down, get a drink, and hang on to your underwear because it's coming at you live. This video took me way too long to accomplish, and we're gonna suffer through this together. I need to get this done, so we're doing it. So it came to be one day that I decided I wanted to make some fireplaces for, obviously, tabletop role-playing. I sketched out some ideas, I had some inspiration of some images I saw online, and I started measuring out XPS, sized them up against a couple miniatures. Now, the fireplaces I wanted to make were inspired by pictures I've seen of fireplaces and hearths in large castles. They're intended to be grand and exquisite and large, something to warm up a large room in a tavern, or something that would be used in a big smithy of some sort. So I decided to stick between 3 and 4 inches for any given size. I had 4 major designs that I wanted to do, the first of which was inspired by a real-life fireplace that I saw in a real-life house that my wife and I considered buying. That it had a normal fireplace, but built into the hearth next to it, it had what was a thing for a rotisserie. It had a built-in rotisserie right there on the side. So I wanted to maybe try and add that in as well. The next one I would want to do is something for a blacksmith, and the idea is that I would use this LED candle to make the base of the fire pit portion. We could add some coals in there, light it up, make it look real cool. So I started drawing that out as well, measuring out fancy lines. I wanted to give this a quasi-dwarven look to it, so I had intentions of making some sharp angles and things like that, so I got started with the sketching and tried to make it work. The third is probably the one I was most excited about, and this was going to be a large, grand tavern hearth. This one is actually inspired by a real one, and I figured even though it's huge, it's about the right size. This is a tavern that is originally in a lodge, and so there's multiple things here that are going to go into it, including a grate and a wooden mantelpiece. Same thing with this fourth one. It's going to have a wooden mantelpiece, it's going to light up in the back, it's going to be made of several layers, and we're going to do the easy foam core pillar method that you might have seen elsewhere. Basically, you're just getting foam core foam, you are cutting it out to size, and then you're just going to stack it on top of each other, and in that form, making layer upon layer of distinct details. So I cut it out, we're going to start gluing it together. This project took me an embarrassing amount of time to produce. I started recording this on July 29th. The date of this recording is the 6th of December. So we've put all these together, stack them on top, and they're going to kind of have this horseshoe shape. The wall is going to be in the back, it's going to have the walls on the side, and obviously the opening in the front. So basically I pick my shape, we're going to set it apart, and we're going to cut it out. And as you'll notice here, these are roughly the same size and shape, but the intention is that these are going to look like rough granite layers by the time it's done. So it's going to look like these are just stones stacked on top of each other. So we'll start gluing them together. I'm going to start texturing these. By doing this, I'm going to get some paper, crumble it up, add some aluminum foil. You've probably seen this method before. The aluminum foil allows for some jaggedness, some rough edges in order to press against the foam itself in order to give it some lands and grooves, ridges, and things like that. This allows for a lot of extra texture for your paint to grab onto. So once I've decided how tall I wanted it to be, I've counted out the layers. We're going to add just a couple more layers on top to give it some extra, to give it some extra height. We'll start gluing it together. This takes a little while. It makes it very slippery slidey. It does not want to stay in one place. But eventually we get it all glued together and it all works out nicely. Back to the smithy. So it's time to start cutting this one out. Now, at the time of this recording, I did not have a Proxon or any sort of hot wire table. I need to cut all these out by hand with an X-Acto blade or some sort of razor blade. Now, some people will say you really ought to just get a wire table, and I would agree. This would have made this much, much simpler. I probably would have got it done much, much faster. However, this was not doable at the time, so you are able to cut with a razor blade as long as you kind of take it slow, you watch what you're doing, you won't screw up your lines. Now, my problem is that I tend to have a lot of good ideas, a lot of great ideas. The problem there being that they don't usually turn out good. So, here's an example of one of them. I need this archway to be round. How do I make round with a knife? Don't know, but I do have a drill. Hence the return of the human CNC machine. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you'll want to look at a previous video where I made an entire vat of acid. I'll put it up there. Now, this method revolves around, no pun intended, it revolves around spinning these little blades that I chuck up in my drill, and it kind of makes a lathe type thing. And so you turn the drill on, it spins around, it makes a dangerous whirling blade. I wear no PPE, and it actually does work pretty good. However, it makes a ginormous mess. So I wouldn't necessarily, I don't know if I would recommend this. Do I recommend this? I don't know. You be the judge. You tell me. And I think I end up going back over this later and fixing it. So, you know, it seems like a brilliant idea at the time. So, don't worry, I don't slice my fingers open, and I am able to clean this out relatively well, and it doesn't turn out too bad. Since I was on a roll with the blacksmithing hearth, I decided to start trimming the fat and start rounding off some of the rough edges. I used a razor blade for this, and with some many gentle strokes, I was able to kind of round it off a little bit. This was a little time consuming because I had to kind of go back and revise it a few times. I then started cutting out the little mantelpiece bit. I don't know. Like I said, these are just kind of design features. I don't know what I was thinking here. These are literally, I don't know what I was thinking. But in any case, they came out looking pretty good. So I trimmed some of this off some more because I realized I wanted this chimney portion to be slanted up a little bit. The chimney ended up becoming rounded with bricks and came out looking pretty good if you ask me. We're going back to the tavern hearth, and I think this is where I started to realize I sort of had a problem. I had to do kind of a lot of elaborate cuts that admittedly wouldn't help if I had a hot wire table. I just realized what I wanted to do was kind of tricky to do with what I had. So I'm trying to make inset cuts, and I had to cut things out and kind of do multiple things that I just didn't really have the tools for. Now, I could have broken this up a little bit and made it easier on myself, but you know me, I like doing things the hard way because I hate myself. So I ended up cutting out a couple extra shapes, and this is going to be the upper molding of the grate that is going to be made. That is basically the fire shield for the fire. Now I had these little plastic dooblies, which will serve a dual purpose, which you'll find out later. So I ended up slicing them up like a little loaf of jacked up looking bread, and I'm going to use these little X-like pieces to make what is going to hold the logs inside the fireplace, as you can see. I will glue them onto a toothpick and eventually paint them black, and then we'll stack some wood on there to make it look like a proper fireplace. Here are some more LED lights that we're going to use from Dollar Tree. You can get these anywhere. I happen to get a big bag of them from Goodwill. They cut up I will say, they cut up very nicely with a razor blade. As long as you cut them in the right spot, you can make them flush like you see that I did here. And that way, when you put them in your fireplace, they will be flush against the back of the fireplace, more or less, as you'll see here in a little bit. I did modify them a little bit and add a flat portion to the back of this particular unit in order to keep the whole thing a little more aesthetically pleasing. Height-wise, I just measured out by sticking it next to the fireplace to see how tall the candle itself is, and then that way you stick it in there and it's like, turns out pretty nice. And then look, whammy kablammy, you got a fireplace. Sweet. So we're going to add a little bit of a face covering to this so that we can carve into that to give it a little bit of detail on the front. This face of the fireplace is going to have, it's going to be a little bit of a focal point, so we want to give it some nice detail there. Here we have those plastic dooblies from before, which we're going to make into sconces for this fireplace. So we cut the thing, put it in the thing, and put it on top of the other thing. It is now September 27th, and I've recently gotten my own hot wire cutter. This is not a Proxxon, this is a Hercules brand, and I might do a review on it sometime. But in any case, it helped me to get very nice, clean lines on a couple of these pieces that I needed to touch up. So, very useful device. It's nice. I'm happy that I got one. It was definitely worth it. I move on to making the stonework. I wanted to make this look like it was crafted and not just a bunch of dumb rocks stacked on top of each other. So I just used a pen and made some random lines, being sure to continue around the corners whenever needed. I suppose I got a minute here. I will say, the reason why this video took me forever to make is if you're not a YouTuber and you've never made videos before, then you don't know all the steps necessarily that goes into it. The problem with a video like this over like a vlog or something is that you're going through it multiple times. You have to film it, you have to do your audio, but you also have to do a several hour crafting thing. And so to break that up into many bite-sized pieces over the course of days and weeks, not to mention I've got a full-time job, a side business, side hustles, 2 young kids, and COVID going on in the world around us, this fell to the wayside a lot, but I was able to finally get it done, which makes me happy. Now that we got Tavern Hearth mostly made, it's time to get the candle in. Now I ended up making this facade for the candle I made it to look like a chimney. I admit I don't like it, however, it was a better alternative than just having the candle stick out the rear side of this thing. This wasn't in its own right thick enough to hide the candle inside of it like the blacksmithing one. So I made the facade on the back and I just glued it to it, and that way it gives you, a little bit extra support in the back to help it stand up straight and not get tipped over, a little bit of extra weight, and I will give it some rough details just to keep it from looking too conspicuous. Moving back over to the home hearth, I'm going to start working on the brickwork for this. This is just done by getting some sort of... whenever you're doing brickwork like this, you need a constant, and what I mean is I'm using this popsicle stick type stick. Instead of coming up with some arbitrary measurement, I'm able to just trace it and continue on to the next row and trace it again. Moving on to the fireplace grates? Is that what these things are? I don't even know what these things are called. Grates? We're going to paint them. We're going to glue them together first with super glue, and then we're going to move on to the grate. How do I don't know what, okay, so this is a, damn it. Okay, I just Googled it, and this is a grate, and this is a screen. Now this material is actually a window screen that I'm going to make the fireplace screen out of. And so this is an old thing that I scrounged from work somewhere, and so I'm just finding a good spot that is still relatively put together, and we're going to put it behind our screen supports to make it look like there are little openings to the inside of the fireplace that can shut and open and lock. Now the screen supports you just saw were kind of flimsy and they were starting to break on me, and I don't really have a better alternative, so I decided to custom make a new piece, which is actually measured out and a little thought given to it. So I measured out the distance between basically the 4 posts that 5, I guess, that I wanted these to be. So you have 2 on the end, 1 in the center, and then 2 in between those 2 far ends. I figured this way it'll look a lot neater, and it's easy to cut these out with the X-Acto blade. And eventually I'll just glue these to the screen, the window screen, to make the fire screen, and it'll just turn out a lot easier and be a lot easier to manipulate. At this point, I actually specifically avoided cutting all the way through in most of the places because manipulating what would be the posts of this would be too difficult if they were dangling freely. So I wanted to keep them slightly connected to the main body of this thin piece of foam. That way, I can just glue the supports themselves to the window screen, and it would be easier to put them in the exact place that I needed and get the rest of it off once the glue had dried. Now, we're getting ready to put the light for the fire into this auxiliary fireplace, just this extra one for fun. I'm going to do the same thing where I put a facade on the back in order to just cover that up. But I did that while the glue was drying, and we're going to go back to this real quick just because I'm eager to kind of get this ready and I really want to look at it. A lot of the glue leaked around the supports here, so I have to be really careful to cut through the foam and the glue, but not the screen itself. Otherwise, I'm going to have to ruin the whole thing and start all over again. I didn't want to do that. So this took me a little while, and it came out kind of dirty. That took me probably 180 hours to do. But I eventually got it. Then just trim up the sides here, and it actually came out looking pretty nice. Actually measuring this out to fit in the gap that I had was a little tricky, but I kind of fill in the gaps a little later on, as you'll see. But for the most part, when we put it in, it's going to look pretty stinking close. There's a little bit of gaps on the top there, as you can see, but we have ways of making you fit. The process I actually had in mind was to split this popsicle stick in half with a knife, and then I will basically sandwich around the base of the screen in order to stand it up and kind of have some sort of hard base to stand it up in there, and then I can kind of seal up the ends. I used some glue to glue it back together, stood it up, and then eventually laid it down to dry, as you can see right there. Moving back to the other fireplace, open up that gap a little bit and fill it in, and then I start tracing out the size of the hole that I need for the facade. This one was given a little less care because at this point in the build, it is October 10th. This is unbelievable. I am embarrassed about how long this has taken me. In any case, we give it the foil. We give it the lines. We start, you see, I get the little stick so we can make the lines again. You want the lines to be straight. Make the lines, and then we can add it to this and glue it on. Again, for the same reasons, we have a chimbly type thing that we can go by, and eventually all this will get painted over, and having the light on the back actually isn't as obvious as it might look right there. Once you paint this whole thing front and back, it's not too obvious, and you still have access to the switch, so you can turn these on and off. It's pretty nice, actually. Going back to the other fireplace, I ended up cutting it with the hot wire cutter and trimmed off too much to where it went through, and you can see light through what would be the rotisserie, which at this point I have decided I don't want to be a rotisserie because I can't be bothered. Like I said, it's late October, I can't be bothered, so I'm going to make it a little spot to store your firewood instead. But first I'm going to get the debris from having all these twigs and stuff on my desk, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to smear some glue in the bottom of each of these fireplaces, and I'm going to sprinkle this in there. Eventually these will get painted, and it'll look like used up wood and ash and debris from previous fires, and it'll have some evidence of these actually being used in some capacity, and this actually turns out pretty nice. I probably could have used a bit more in all of these, but the desired effect is gotten, and especially with this one, once you put the screen on there, you actually won't be able to see much in the fireplace itself. So now that these are all built and ready to go, I use the Blackmagic Craft combination Mod Podge and acrylic paint. I will from here on just be calling this Black Magic, air quotes. So you give it a mix, you give it a scrape, and it's ready to go. You wet your brush, and then you dab it in. And you can put it on all the things that you got, like this, and this thing, and the other thing. And you're ready to go. Enjoy the montage. Okay, base coat on. Let's start with colors. Now, the problem with colors is that a lot of colors look exactly like a lot of other colors. So if you don't know color theory, making colors stand out from other colors while still looking similar to the first color can be kind of tricky. So my goal with this particular one was to make it kind of a sandstone, yellowish kind of color and kind of have some accent colors to go with that. So I made a light brown base coat. As you can see, it's a lot brighter than the one behind it there. And I wanted to make it lighter and kind of just go lighter and lighter from there. Now, the overall results, by the end of it, I enjoyed, but that said, it wasn't what I wanted initially. But as Bob Ross would say, these are happy mistakes. So I'm okay with it, but this is definitely something that I look forward to working on a bit more. Now, this one I think looks pretty good. So this one here, I'm kind of just winging it at this point, but I wanted this to look more granite-like, but I wanted it to have these dark undertones, so I kind of just winged it. I kind of just was playing it by ear, and it ended up being pretty dark, but again, that one actually turned out pretty good in my opinion. Now, on to the big boy. I have it all primed out, and it's feeling pretty good, and I went daring and decided to start lighter. Now, at this point, there was so many mistakes to be made that I couldn't even tell you which one. Uh, I couldn't even tell you which one contributed to the overall color changing ultimately. Look, it kind of looks like a face. Look at that! Oh, look over there! Oh no! What? Anyway, having wung it from here, I moved on to regular colors. Now, Blackmagic Craft did this thing with his witch's hut where he painted several bricks out of the whole mass, kind of odd and warm colors, kind of at random, in order to give them a more natural undertone, which I think turned out really, really great. So instead of practicing or rewatching that video, I decided just to start throwing colors on things to see how it would turn out, knowing that it would probably come out poorly, but knowing that I could also just go over it again. So if you're new to this and you don't want to screw something up, don't worry. It's really hard to permanently screw something up, especially with colors, because you can always just go over it again. Now, I will say this basically hunter's safety orange that I chose, and I believe this is like a pumpkin orange with Apple Barrel brand paint. It was not the right choice. I should not have done this. This is a full stop, don't do this color. It was not a good idea. I saw a couple bright orange-ish colors in that video, or at least I seem to recall seeing that, and so I just went with the bright-ish orange color that I had, and it didn't turn out awesome. But I was able to eventually go over it and fix it, as you'll see shortly. I start doing some lighter tones in some of the other bricks on some of the other pieces. However, another problem, I should say mistake that I made here is that I got really lazy and was using a kind of a too big of a brush for this, and you can see I'm kind of treating this pretty fast and loose. I'm using a pretty large brush to try to do smaller bricks, and just don't do that, guys. By this time, it was mid-October, and I could not be bothered. Now, painting is done. Clean up the brushes. And for the wet palette, get that crap out of here. On to dry brushing. Get the thing. Look at it. It looks pretty bad. But some of these I'm feeling hopeful and kind of look promising as far as the undertones that... Don't look at that. Look, it looks like an ice cream bar. Like an ice cream sandwich. That's so bad. But in any case, it's good to come up with a couple of colors that you like in a palette, and don't be scared to mix colors and just experiment, because you can mix it up and you'll never know what you find. So you start dry brushing that on. Make sure that your brush is very, very dry. Do not use anything that you've cleaned recently. You dab it in a little bit of paint smeared around on a paper towel or a napkin. That is usually the best way to go. And then you are painting the very base of what is going to be several layers of dry brushing. And so you can go pretty heavy on that. And when you need to fill in the gaps, hopefully that will all come out in the wash, which is right here. Now, if you're like me, and what I think most people maybe watching a video like this or a tutorial of some sort are, you are on a limited budget, which means you can go out and buy a pre-made wash, which come in all different sorts of shades and colors, which are great. However, if you want to make your own, you can just do it by adding a little bit of acrylic paint to water, and you can emphasize certain shades and hues with adding and mixing a little bit of color, but I primarily use black in order to make a dark shadowy color. And I also add either some dish soap or some rinse aid in order to make it flow better in between the cracks, as you'll see here. And then once I'm ready to actually use it, I will get pretty fast and loose with the application. Usually if your paint has dried, even your dry brushing, it won't reconstitute that quickly if you toss some water on it. And the whole point is that hopefully your cracks and your grooves are deep enough to where when you apply the wash, it's going to go in between the cracks and stuff like that, and then not you can dab it off later and you'll be able to get the majority of it off with it remaining in the cracks. Now, I did a whole bunch of painting, and as you can see, it is now November 11th. And as you can see, I've gotten some new lights that I'm trying out. They were really cheap. They're at Walmart. They were like shop lights. So tell me if you like them or not. Tell me if you think these are better or worse. I don't know if the warmer color is better. I know that cooler colors are better for filming, but I kind of like them. I think it makes the colors of the article in question a bit more clear. But in any case, all my main painting is done, and I realized that a lot of these are kind of looking similar. So I chose a couple different colors to dry brush in order to differentiate them a little bit, and that's where I ended up getting the majority of my different colors from. Not necessarily the undertones, so if you are very new at painting, don't feel like you have to do some of these more advanced techniques, not that I am any model to go by, but the undertones are not exactly what you need to worry about, but you can do basically 3 layers, especially on things like stone, and still get a pretty good result, as you can see. Now, what I'm measuring here is the length I need for these sticks. These sticks are going to be the wooden mantelpieces that I'm going to make for each one of these fireplaces. Now, I'm going to sand these down a little bit, and I'm going to also carve out a couple of delicate little tiny pieces in order to be certain shapes for different things. Now, here I have some wood stain from projects past, and this is where I tell you to wear all the proper PPE, work in ventilated area, wear gloves, blah, 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 blah. It's wood stain. It will stain your skin. Not that it hurts or burns or anything, but it's like you wiped your butt with your hand and it won't come off. So my thought process was, yes, I could use XPS foam to simulate a wood effect, but I figured with something like this where the focal point is the front end of this item, I wanted something to look kind of nice. So I figured I would just stain actual wood and then glue that to the front of the fireplaces. So I'm doing little support portions right now, as well as some mounting boards, which I'll explain in a second. The stain dries very, very quickly, which means that you don't have to wait too long. I'm just kind of laying it out. I've kind of pre-cut them ahead of time so I could snap them easily once they dried, and they will fit nicely into the recesses that I need them to fit into. And I have a sandpaper here so I can just sand them down a little bit. And basically, I just find where I want to put them, glue them, let them dry, and this works out great. I'm actually really pleased with this point of the project because it worked out very easily and it worked out great. It was super easy. So highly recommend you try this if you haven't done it yet. I wouldn't do this with all wood because, well, I don't know. Like if you build a house and the exterior is wood, it might look good, but it's also a lot of work. On this unit, I carved out a little V-shaped groove all the way across so I could just kind of wedge this in there with some glue and let it dry. I'm not too worried about the overflow that you see right there because this will dry clear and it'll turn out okay and you won't really notice it. Here we do the same thing for the extra fireplace, and this is actually the one that I have supports for, which will simply get glued into place. Now that all the paint and stuff is done, it's time to move on to the accessories of all the fireplaces. This includes the screen for the main tavern fireplace. This is going to get a little bit of Mod Podge to strengthen it up, make it more rigid, and then it's going to get some black paint to emphasize the spots that I need. Now this right here is the skull of a bird thing that I literally found on the street outside of my house while going for a walk, and I thought this would be a cool mounted head to go over a tavern fireplace. So I'm just going to prime it and paint it, and I'm going to give it a couple different shades of a bone beige color in order to make it look like it's the head of some sort of rock or a large predatory bird or something. I'll then go start making the stacks of wood for the inside of the fireplaces, as well as the inside of the firebox, or whatever you call this thing. The thing that holds the wood on the side. If you've never seen these before, some houses actually have this to where on the back side there is actually a door that leads to the outside. So you can cut all your wood outside and then just open the little hatch next to the chimney on the outside of the building, and you can put your wood in through the house there, and you can lock it up from one side to keep people from crawling through. It should be mentioned that this is not actually wood. If you're wondering how I got this nice little detailed wood to scale, this is actually trimmings from a rosemary plant that is very large and enterprising and is taking up my backyard. Then moved on to making a little fire poker and a hook to hang it on out of a paper clip, and I was able to just glue and stick that into the styrofoam and hang the fire poker on top of that and kind of glue it into place, and that actually worked out really nicely. The ring I use is just like a little crafting ring, and now I've got that hanging on the side, and the dark color kind of contrasts well with the brickwork. What you see here is one of those tags that they use to close bags of bread, and I was able to trim off the lumpy parts on the side in order to make the detailed portions of the screen to go in front of the fireplace. And these, if you look back at the design in the beginning of the episode, you can kind of see actually match up pretty well. So those get glued on, the fireplace grates get glued into the base of each of the fireplaces that are getting one, and we're getting pretty close to the end here. These are turning out really good, but the last step is to continue working on the centerpieces, which, should you choose to use them, will be the focal point or the pop of color you need on a otherwise grim, dark palette. Can really bring a pop of color to an otherwise really depressing kind of Strahd campaign. You're going to want something that's a nice pop of color. So this is actually a shield from a mech warrior mech that I had laying around, and I'm not going to fix it, so we're going to repaint it and make it look like a magic item hanging in a tavern. Once we are done with our mantelpieces, they are going to go in place. So that's it, everybody. That's the build. What did I learn from this? I learned that you shouldn't bite off more than you can chew. In this case, I decided to build 4 different fireplaces because I thought it would save time overall. And maybe it did. I won't have to go back and make another fireplace in even the distant future, I would imagine. But this took way longer than I thought it was going to be, and it ended up biting me in the butt in that regard. But I'm very pleased with how these turned out. I've already gotten a lot of compliments on them. I'm not tooting my own horn, but people seem to be impressed with them, and I think they turned out good. And I think as an illustrative piece, they are going to serve their purpose really good. So thank you for watching. If you liked what you saw, or if you got any value out of this, let me know what you think. Leave a comment in the bottom, and let me know how I can improve. What do you want to see next? I'm also going to be doing book reviews again, so if there's a certain DMing tool that you want to see reviewed, let me know what it is, and I might just pick it up and review it just for you. So thank you so much for swinging by. I appreciate you watching the channel. Any shares or support that you can give is awesome. I love to hear from my viewers. I love to read the comments and see what you guys have to say. So as always, like, subscribe. I want to know what you think. Leave a comment down below. How did you make your fireplaces? Is this something that you're going to be able to use in your builds? Is this something you would even bother to do? Let me know. I'd love to build a community around these sort of things. Also, feel free to check out my previous video. YouTube thinks you'll dig that other video right there. And subscribe if you haven't already for more of this nonsense. Thank you so much for watching.